A quiet man in faded jeans was told to move. No one checked his name. The man in seat 1 smirked, and minutes later, $500 million quietly evaporated from the market. What followed would bring an entire airline to its knees. Before we dive in, drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And what would you have done in his place? JFK International Airport buzzed with its usual polished chaos, heels clicking like metronomes, overpriced espresso swirling in paper cups, flight announcements echoing across vaulted ceilings lined with chrome and ambition. Amidst the blur of designer suits and titanium luggage, no one noticed the man in the charcoal gray jacket. And that's exactly how he wanted it. Jungkook John walked with unhurried certainty. His stride was relaxed, his gaze soft but steady. Over one shoulder hung a weathered leather satchel, worn but dignified. He wore black jeans, old boots, and a navy tee under a faded canvas coat. Simple, honest clothing that set him apart in a world allergic to modesty. But it wasn't the clothes, it was the stillness, the kind that didn't seek attention. It commanded it without trying. In his hand, a first-class boarding pass. Atlantic Air Flight 447 to Zurich, Seat 1A. The name read K. John. No entourage, no flash. Just a man flying alone. The gate agent didn't look up when she scanned his pass. First class all the way up, she mumbled flatly. Jungkook nodded, polite as ever, and disappeared down the jet bridge into the softly lit silence of Atlantic's flagship cabin. The interior exhaled luxury, polished wood, amber lights, reclining leather seats, and the hushed promise of exclusivity. He reached 1A, but something was off. Someone was already there. A man in his mid-50s, face sharp as cut stone, hair salt and pepper, sat spread out like royalty. One leg draped over the other, a glass of champagne in one hand, his other scrolling emails with the smug rhythm of someone who never heard the word no. Jungkook glanced again at his pass, then turned to a blonde flight attendant arranging wine glasses on a tray. Her tag read, Natalie. Excuse me, he said softly. I believe that's my seat. Natalie looked him over like an equation, then smiled, the kind of smile polished into place by policy, not humanity. Sir, I'll need you to step aside. There's been a last-minute seating change. That seat has been reassigned. She didn't check his name, didn't look at the pass, just delivered a decorated dismissal. Jungkook didn't argue. He didn't flinch. I wasn't informed of any change, he said, still calm. That's my assigned seat. Paid for. Confirmed. Natalie dropped her voice like it was a favor. We received a priority request from one of our Platinum Legacy clients. We appreciate your cooperation. She gestured to row 17. Still business class, but a world away from where he was meant to be. Jungkook looked at her. He didn't say it, but something had already begun. Elon Trent didn't even glance up, and in that moment Jungkook understood exactly what this was. But he said nothing. Not yet. Business class was quieter than economy, sure, but it wasn't first. Not in the way that mattered. Jungkook eased into seat 17C without a word. Around him, other passengers shuffled, reclined, folded blankets with the kind of grace that only came from flying often. Silk scarves, brushed wool, quiet superiority. They glanced at him just long enough to judge, then looked away. He could feel the invisible lines, the ones that cut sharper when you pretended they weren't there. He'd walked through them his entire life, but today, they pressed deeper. He tucked his satchel under the seat and leaned back. The plane hadn't even left the ground, but the altitude of judgment was already suffocating. 2 rows ahead, a woman leaned toward her husband and said, just loud enough to hear, maybe he used points. They've gotten lax with upgrades lately. Her husband didn't bother lowering his voice. Or he won some influencer contest. Looks like one of those YouTube types. Probably edits sad songs in a basement in Seoul. Jungkook smiled slightly. It didn't reach his eyes. He'd heard worse. He'd lived worse. But this wasn't about him anymore. This was about what still passed for normal at 38,000 feet. As the final passengers boarded, the curtain to first class remained open just long enough for Jungkook to see Natalie leaning in toward Elon Trent, whispering with the kind of deference reserved for donors, not passengers. And that was the moment it clicked. Trent, the tech mogul who once declared in a live interview that diversity is great for branding but deadly for performance, was now sipping champagne in a seat he hadn't earned, while Jungkook, who had, was asked to disappear quietly into business class. Jungkook looked down at his phone. One unread notification blinked at the bottom of the screen. Protocol ready. He tapped it. The screen dimmed to black, revealing a single prompt: Initiate Clause 7C. Reason: Operational Ethics Breach. His thumb hovered for only a second before he pressed confirm. No alarm sounded. No dramatic signal. Just a silent correction. No one noticed. Not the woman still analyzing his shoes. Not the man reading The Economist. Not even the boy across the aisle until he looked up. The kid, maybe 8 or 9, with a soft hoodie and a panda plush pressed against his chest, stared at Jungkook like he was trying to place a face from a dream. Then he leaned toward his mom and whispered, "Is that Jungkook?" The woman, elegant in a neat sky blue sweater, glanced over with a tired but polite smile. Jungkook met her eyes and nodded, just slightly. A second later, the curtain slid shut, and first class disappeared. But the shift had already begun. Not in the cabin. In the system. "That's Jungkook," the boy whispered again. "I'm sure it is," his mother replied gently, brushing a curl from his forehead. "Let people have their peace, baby." "But I don't get it," the child said, eyes never leaving Jungkook. "Why'd they make him move?" Jungkook didn't turn. He didn't speak. But the boy's question, pure, unfiltered, hung in the air like smoke. Honest. Innocent. Too real. Minutes passed. Then came a soft ping, barely audible beneath the hum of cabin lights and tray tables clicking into place. But somewhere in the forward galley, a red notification blinked alive on a secured screen. Bryce Harmon, the flight operations lead, stared at it in disbelief. Incoming. Clause 7C. Priority level. Red. Authorized initiator. J. John. Do not override. He double-checked the seat map. Row 17C. His eyes widened. Clause 7C wasn't some tech glitch. It was a buried protocol. A corporate emergency trigger for ownership-level breaches. Harmon exhaled. What the hell did we just step into? Meanwhile, up in one, Elon Trent swirled his second glass of champagne and smirked. "You'd think by now they'd teach these people how the world works," he muttered. The woman next to him, polished blazer, watch worth more than most mortgages, offered a tight smile and sipped her wine in silence. Elon chuckled. "Luxury's getting crowded, don't you think? Feels like I'm flying a G6 with baggage in the back." A few nervous laughs fluttered nearby. Most passengers stared straight ahead, pretending not to hear. In row 3, a man in a crisp navy suit nudged his partner. "Didn't that guy start in first class?" "Maybe it was a system glitch," she whispered. "He didn't really look the part." No one corrected her. No one stood up. No one asked why. Between the silence and the smirks, a decision had already been made. Not by the airline, not by protocol, but by people who'd learned comfort was easier than courage. But somewhere, far from the curated quiet of Atlantic air, things began to stir. In Zurich, cell phones buzzed. In Manhattan, an internal alert pinged across Atlantic Air's executive terminal. A corporate lawyer frowned at her screen. "Clause 7C just fired mid-flight? Who the hell is J. John?" But Jungkook sat calmly in 17C, legs crossed, notebook open. He wasn't journaling. He was documenting, keeping score. And when the reckoning came, no one on that plane could claim they hadn't seen it coming, because they had. They just chose to look away. If you're still watching, comment 8 so we know you're part of the story. Because it's not just about flying, it's about where you stand when someone gets pushed out of their rightful seat. The curtain between classes swayed slightly. A ripple in the air. A change had begun. Flight 447 cruised at 38,000 feet. Outside, the Atlantic slept under stars. Inside, silence reigned, expensive, fragile, and ready to break. But in seat 17C, Jungkook sat like a stone at the center of a storm no one else could see. His notebook lay open, not with sketches or scribbles, but filled with dense columns of numbers, initials, and cryptic notes like optics override, Trent flagged, and bias correlation metrics. But the pen had stopped moving. Now, his attention had shifted to a sleek, black device with no logo, just a biometric pad glowing faintly at its center. He pressed his thumb down, and the screen came to life. Authentication verified. Welcome, J. John. Volta Systems live. Trigger Clause 7C. operational ethics breach. Target, Atlantic Air 447. Real-time activation warning. Action, irreversible. He stared at it for a moment, thinking of Natalie's cold professionalism as she asked him to move without even checking his name. He remembered Elon Trent, sprawled across 1A with champagne in hand, murmuring about how legacy still matters. He remembered the child beside him asking, "Why did they make him move?" A question far too honest to ignore. Then, silently, Jungkook tapped, "Confirm." The screen went black. No sound, no announcement. But behind the scenes, across airline operations centers, compliance hubs, and legal offices in Zurich and New York, alerts triggered. In the cockpit, a small notification flashed across the co-pilot screen. Clause 7C in review. Executive monitoring engaged. Meanwhile, in the cabin, everything remained perfectly still. No one noticed. Not the passenger browsing luxury properties on his tablet. Not the elderly woman sipping water from a crystal glass. Not Natalie, still chatting casually in the galley. But the system had already begun to shift. The curtain rustled, and then a soft voice interrupted the silence. "Excuse me, sir." Jungkook looked up to find Evan, the youngest flight attendant, clearly nervous, holding a tablet and glancing between the screen and Jungkook's face. "Are you Mr. J. John?" Evan asked. Jungkook didn't smile. He simply nodded. "You're doing just fine," he said gently. And with that, Evan understood. This man in 17C wasn't just another passenger. He was the reason this flight would land differently than it took off. Elon Trent, still lounging in seat 1A like a sultan in exile, reclined deeper into the leather luxury, swirling his third glass of champagne with smug delight. "You know what I hate about flying commercial?" he said aloud to no one in particular, his voice rich with inherited arrogance. "You pay for silence, and you still end up breathing in the same air as the peasants." No one laughed, but no one challenged him either. 2 rows behind, a woman slowly lifted her gaze from a paperback, her eyes drifting toward the galley where she'd overheard Natalie moments earlier. "He doesn't look like he belongs here," Natalie had whispered, casual, surgical, before the alert hit her tablet. Now that very device pulsed with an urgent red banner. "Compliance alert. Executive oversight initiated. Do not interfere." Beside her, Bryce, the senior flight manager, struggled to keep his composure as sweat pooled at the edge of his collar. He pressed his earpiece harder and muttered under his breath, "No, I don't know who John is, but Zurich Legal just flagged him as a confirmed stakeholder." Natalie's face lost its color. "He's what?" she breathed. 1,000 feet back, Jungkook sat calmly in 17C, flipping a page of the in-flight magazine he wasn't reading. His body relaxed but his gaze fixed ahead. Across the aisle, the child stared at him in silent awe. Meanwhile, 5 rows back, a college student named Maya Lin had been live-tweeting ever since boarding. She hadn't recognized him at first, until she zoomed in mid-video. "Wait, is that Jungkook?" Her video, captioned, "They kicked Jungkook out of first class for some finance creep," hit 340,000 views within the hour. Then 700K. Then 1.1 million. When the clip landed on TikTok under the tag #Flight447, people weren't laughing, they were furious. Inside the aircraft, whispers crackled through the air like static. Some were baffled, some amused. A few looked genuinely disturbed. In the galley, Evan stood frozen, remembering Natalie's words earlier. The guy in 1A asked that no one sit beside him. I mean, just look at that guy. But Evan understood now they hadn't just disrespected a customer. They had displaced the future. Back in seat 17C, Jungkook gently closed the magazine, set it on his tray, and stared straight ahead, not waiting for an apology, but for the inevitable reckoning. At precisely 3:17 p.m. Zurich time, every screen at Atlantic Air's European Operations Center flickered in unison. A red band surged across the main terminal, Clause 7C activated. Live oversight engaged. Ownership verification confirmed. The director of operations, mid-latte, mid-meeting about Christmas promos, froze, then dropped both her drink and her jaw. Snatching her phone, she called legal and shouted, "Who the hell is John? And why does the system say he holds controlling interest?" Silence echoed on the other end of the line. Then the reply came, measured but stunned. "He's real. Zurich just cleared it." That's John Jungkook. Back on board Flight 447, most passengers were still oblivious, sipping ginger alesh and scrolling through curated playlists. But in the first-class galley, Natalie's hands were visibly trembling as she scrolled through the crew's secured internal feed. The image was unmistakable. Jungkook, global icon, investor, private stakeholder through Valta Capital. Silent acquisition finalized, 48% controlling equity in Atlantic Air. Her tablet nearly slipped from her grip. Meanwhile, Elon Trent remained blissfully unaware, unraveling into another stream of self-congratulatory arrogance. I swear, he chuckled to the sleek woman seated beside him, we keep lowering standards like this and first class will start feeling like a damn charity bus. He smirked, then leaned closer. Honestly, it's not even about race, it's about class. Some people just don't understand how to function at this altitude. The woman said nothing, just reached for her wine glass, her grip faintly shaking. Back in business class, the current had already shifted. Once muted phones now lit up with frantic texts and online alerts. Is that really Jungkook? Someone whispered. Wait, he owns part of the airline? Another murmured. What the hell is Clause 7C? But by then, it wasn't just in the cabin anymore. Thousands of miles away in Manhattan, Valta Capital's algorithm began executing precise sell orders. First, a silent offload of Atlantic Air shares, volume calculated to devastate without warning. Within 90 seconds, the stock was down 12%. By minute 3, it had cratered to 27%. Bloomberg's ticker flashed. Atlantic Air plummets amid ownership breach and corporate accountability scandal. Back on the plane, Evan passed Jungkook's row for the third time, each step slower, more deliberate. His eyes flicked nervously toward the calm figure in 17C, the epicenter of a financial earthquake. Jungkook didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice. He tapped his phone once more. Another code dispatched. Another silent directive engaged. This wasn't revenge. This was a systemic correction. And then, just as the tension became unbearable, the curtain to first class parted. Bryce emerged, pale and glistening, walking toward row 17 like a man delivering his own resignation. Mr. John, he said, voice tight, nearly cracking. There's been a development. He swallowed hard. Zurich reached out. We now realize there's been a misunderstanding and we'd like to correct that. Jungkook didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even raise an eyebrow. He simply replied, it wasn't a misunderstanding, Bryce. And then, slowly, he rose, graceful, precise, and retrieved his coat with unhurried hands. The entire cabin turned silent. Eyes tracked him like the movement of gravity itself. But Jungkook didn't walk back to 17C. He walked forward, back to his rightful place. The walk from row 17 to 1A wasn't long. But in that moment, it split the cabin like a fault line. On one side sat passengers paralyzed by awe. On the other, passengers paralyzed by guilt. Each step Jungkook took was deliberate. Not proud, not spiteful, just true. Eyes that had once rolled now refused to meet his. The whispered judgments, the dismissive glances, the assumptions about his worth, they all hung heavy in the pressurized silence. When Jungkook reached the front, the golden glow of first class no longer felt luxurious, felt exposed. Bryce stood aside with a strained smile, trying to offer welcome as if this was just another seating adjustment. But everyone knew it wasn't. Mr. John, your original seat has been prepared, Bryce stammered, trying to inject formality into a voice on the edge of panic. On behalf of the crew, I'd like to extend. But Jungkook brushed past him without a word, not in defiance, but in disinterest. His presence alone was enough. Elon Trent, still lounging smugly in seat 1A, looked up. His smirk flickered, not yet vanished but clearly shaken. You again? He scoffed. Didn't they move you already? Jungkook didn't answer right away. He stood there, still and calm, letting the moment stretch and settle into discomfort. Then he spoke, voice low, even deliberate. You've mistaken quiet for weakness. Elon shifted uneasily. Look, I don't know what kind of PR game this is, but Jungkook raised a hand, not to silence, but to end. You don't need to know who I am. Then, from the inside of his jacket, he pulled a sleek black card, platinum edged, nameless, embossed with the unmistakable crest of Valta Capital. He held it between two fingers, just long enough for Bryce, Natalie, and every watching eye in first class to see. Then he slipped it back into his coat. Elon opened his mouth again, but no sound came out. There were no clever remarks left. Jungkook turned to Natalie. You moved me without checking my name. You made assumptions based on appearance, not identity. Natalie's face flushed crimson. Her voice cracked as she tried to defend herself. I was just following procedure. No, Jungkook said, his tone still composed. You were following prejudice, packaged as protocol. Then to Bryce, Atlantic Air has just violated its operational ethics agreement. Clause 7C is in effect. Valta Capital is initiating a full withdrawal. Integration with Madair is suspended. Investor notifications are already underway. Bryce's knees nearly buckled. Why, you're serious? Jungkook stepped toward seat 1A and rested a hand gently on the headrest. I gave this company a chance to show me its culture, not its marketing. He looked Bryce in the eyes. You failed spectacularly. He sat down quietly, completely, and the silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. One row back, an older man leaned toward his wife. They didn't even know who he was, he whispered. His wife replied, eyes forward. They didn't care, until they had to. Jungkook reclined, fastened his seatbelt, and closed his eyes. He wasn't just reclaiming a seat. He was reclaiming power, and the fallout had already begun. Within minutes, terminal screens across Europe and the US flickered from tennis scores to urgent headlines. Social media detonated in real time. Flight 447. Jungkook owns Atlantic. Justice at 38,000 feet. CNN's banner blazed across lounges. Valta Capital pulls $500 million after stakeholder John Jungkook was ejected from first class mid-flight. But inside the aircraft, the fallout wasn't flashy. It was surgical, personal, measured. Bryce stood pale by the galley, barely holding it together as his crew tablet refreshed every 30 seconds with new alerts. Internal investigation initiated. Leadership under review. Misconduct report pending. Messages from corporate legal poured in. None were reassuring. And all of it started from one decision, one insult, one seat. 1A. Natalie, once the image of poise and corporate control, now sat alone on the jump seat behind the galley curtain. Her hands were tight fists in her lap. Her face, still and pale. Her name was now trending globally under a thread titled, The Flight Attendant Who Judged Jungkook. She didn't look up. Didn't defend herself. She simply stared down at her screen, watching herself become the face of something bigger, an ugly truth about appearance, assumptions, and status. As for Elon Trent, all that bravado had vanished. The champagne flute he once twirled like a crown now sat untouched beside him. His jaw clenched, color drained. He wasn't the most powerful man on the plane anymore. He wasn't even relevant. There's got to be some misunderstanding, he muttered under his breath. But even he didn't believe it. Jungkook, meanwhile, didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He opened his notebook, jotted one final line, and closed it slowly. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about attention. It was about correction. From the rear of the cabin, Evan, the junior flight attendant, stood frozen, caught between what he had been trained to follow and what he now knew to be right. For hours he had stayed silent, but now something in him shifted. He stepped forward. Sir, he said softly, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. Jungkook looked up, not angry, but honest, and that look made Evan shift uncomfortably in his own skin. You weren't the problem, Jungkook said gently, but now you know, so decide who you'll be next time. Evan nodded, that sentence settling on him like armor. It would stay with him longer than any paycheck. At the front of the cabin, the cockpit door opened. Captain Harris stepped out. His face was composed, but his eyes held the burden of a man just briefed midair by corporate HQ. He approached Jungkook and spoke carefully. Mr. John, he said, we've just been informed of your position. I'd like to personally apologize on behalf of the entire flight crew. Jungkook gave a small nod. Apologies are a start, he said. But culture is what happens when no one's watching. Fix that. Then he turned toward the window, leaving behind a silence louder than any statement. Flight 447 began its descent over Zurich. The lights dimmed in that soft, curated way luxury airlines used to suggest calm, even when everything inside the company was unraveling. because calm now was a lie. By the time the plane touched down, chaos was already in motion. From Manhattan to London, executives scrambled. In boardrooms and legal departments, whispered panic echoed the same truth. He owns us. No one applauded the landing. No claps, no smiles. The tension hadn't cleared, it had calcified. Those who once sat tall now avoided eye contact. Elon Trent sat arms folded, eyes blank. His reputation was already in freefall. Investors were fleeing, partnerships suspended, and whispers of a career audit had begun. He hadn't just insulted a passenger. He had insulted his boss. In the galley, Natalie didn't move when two suited men boarded with airport security. "Miss Green," one said, "you'll need to remain on board for debrief." She nodded. No protest, no words. She knew. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a pattern. And now it had a face. Next to her, Bryce received the same order. His hands trembled as he handed over his crew tablet. In the terminal, more suits waited, not for them, but for Elon Trent. "Mr. Trent," one began with professional coldness, "your privileges with Atlantic Air and all partner carriers have been revoked. Your accounts are under review. You'll be escorted from the terminal." Elon opened his mouth, but no sound came. The man who once ruled the air walked off it with nothing. Jungkook remained in seat 1A as the rest of the plane disembarked. No guards, no entourage, just a man in quiet clothes, back straight, head clear. At the exit, he passed Evan, who stood by the galley, tears threatening in his eyes. "Sir," Evan whispered, "thank you." Jungkook paused just long enough to say, "Next time someone's silence feels wrong, say something." Evan nodded, and that moment rewired something deep within him. Outside the jetway, a small group waited. Not press, not paparazzi. Internal airline staff. At the front stood Lena Caro, newly appointed VP of Crisis Management. She extended a hand. "Mr. John, we deeply regret," but Jungkook stepped past her with a calm nod. He didn't need regrets. He had action. 3 days later, a handwritten letter appeared online, titled, "The Cost of Silence," signed, Evan Lee. In it, he admitted what he'd ignored. He pledged 6 months of salary to a fund for airline workers who'd been discriminated against. And he ended with, "Silence has a price. I'm paying mine first." Valta Capital matched the donation tenfold. Quietly, anonymously, Jungkook didn't post, didn't explain. He simply worked in silence, rebuilding a system from 17C. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to, because in a world that too often mistakes wealth for worth, his silence exposed the system. His final message wasn't shouted. It was lived. Power isn't how loud you speak. It's what you choose to fix when no one's watching.